you've got Cardinal Sarah here. He stops short of calling the Pope a heretic, but he says that the document contains heresy.
Mark Lambert has a great article over at the Catholic Herald. We're going to be linking to it. He's also got a blog post on his website, which we'll also link to, and a wonderful video on his YouTube channel. Don't let Tucci's scandalous book distract you from Cardinal Sarah's rejection of Fiducia Supplicans. It's a big story. It's a big thing when a prince of the church rejects a document from the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith. I don't think we can underscore that, can we?
Absolutely. And remember that Cardinal Sarah was one of 5 cardinals who issued some dubia just before the Synod on Synodality started at the beginning of October. Do you remember that? So
yeah,
there's obviously growing concern among the princes of the church. Thank God, because, I mean, what do we have to put up with for there to be some sort of concern? And the bishops are shockingly quiet, and it makes you think that perhaps they're just biding their time and, you know, waiting for Pope Francis to pass on to his eternal reward. But I don't know whether that's good enough, because people like you and I, who are engaged in catechesis and evangelization, you see all the time the damage that this is doing in the church and the souls that are being lost. It's absolutely, you know, it's just tragic, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. It makes life that much more difficult, especially within our families and our parish communities. There's a growing division, a civil war of sorts that's brewing and getting worse by the day, I would argue. But let's talk about Cardinal Sarah. What is he saying about Fiducia Supplicans?
Well, it's really very well written. It was written in Italian. It came out on Sandro Magister. I don't know if you know Sandro Magister. Is like a really well-known, what they call a vaticanista, like a seasoned Vatican reporter in Rome. So very well respected, and has always had special releases from cardinals and stuff like that. So he was the guy who released the letter from Pell. Do you remember the Demos letter that was written? Yeah. That went round the Curia, basically saying that, you know, the Franciscan papacy is a complete disaster. So he's written it, so it's been published there, and it really is an interesting thing, because you can tell he's a very careful and erudite African cardinal, well known for his erudition, and he's been very careful in not criticising the office of the papacy. But you can see that as things get increasingly problematic, he's ramping up his own, you know, sort of language, which is what the cardinals are supposed to do. They're supposed to help the Pope in governing the church. The problem seems to be that in Pope Francis, we've got a Pope who's not listening to there is, you know, despite the fact that, especially at the beginning of his pontificate, he was very much running this idea of collegiality, you know, that he wanted to just be the Bishop of Rome, and, you know, he sort of rejected the title of Pope, didn't he, to some extent. But it's clear that he's not listening. You know, we've seen it time and again with the Dubia cardinals. And now he seems to have this new lease of confidence with Fernandez in the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. So this commentary that Cardinal Sarah's released starts off by directly quoting Pope Francis, and he uses Pope Francis' own language all the way through, I think, which is a really clever thing to do, because it shows that he has read the Holy Father, he's taken it seriously, he's taken it on board, he's thought very carefully about it, and what he's seeing is an obvious contradiction between what Pope Francis says and what Pope Francis does. And he starts off really by quoting Pope Francis on the devil. And I don't know if you've noticed, but this is one of the things that Pope Francis has done recently that he tends to do. He does something heterodox, he does something problematic or scandalous, and then he steps back into orthodoxy. It's like this little two-step, and you can see him doing it in the documents as well. You know, like in Fiducia Supplicans, for example, the first thing they do is affirm the doctrine of marriage, and then they contradict it. And this is exactly the same thing as we saw in the Church of England over here recently in the Synod, where they've approved same-sex blessings. And it's the same sort of thing. First of all, they say, "Oh, this is what the church teaches," but, and then they come across with the heresy. You know, then they bring in the heresy. And one of the things I liked best about Cardinal Sarah's words were that he excoriates the bishops who are supporting Fiducia Supplicans and saying that they're basically throwing the sheep to the wolves, you know, that really needs to be said. And we really need to be in a situation where, you know, we see those prelates standing up for what's really being taught and what really matters. And unfortunately, that's not happening. I mean, we are seeing a backlash, aren't we, especially from Africa, but also Hungary. You know, the confraternities of Catholic clergy have done really well in standing up. Like, I was really impressed with the English confraternity, gave a really strong defence of Catholic teaching. But it seems like they've done that almost to stop the bishops from going along with Pope Francis. I don't know if you've noticed that. You know, you've got in England 500 plus priests who got a statement out really, really quickly saying that they weren't going to do it and that they were going to follow the teaching of the church. Well, if you've got, that's a lot of clergy in the UK, you know, you can't really have the bishops come out and contradict them then. So that was kind of a clever move, you know. So we are seeing a backlash.
I would argue that this situation, Fiducia Supplicans, is causing a lot of those, what I would call fence-sitting bishops, to say, I got to get off this fence. It's now or never. Would you agree to that?
Oh, yeah, I think it's a really good point, actually, Joe. And I think that the problem is that we've got to have an understanding that when you're a bishop, they're engaged in lots of different elements of running a diocese. So, that, you know, I would imagine that what's going on in Rome isn't necessarily at the forefront of their knowledge set at all times, you know. So they're dealing with what's going on with the priests, with the sacraments, you know, there's the catechesis in the diocese. There's lots of stuff. So, but this is something, and I would imagine it's quite easy to put this on a back burner, whatever's going on in Rome, because you're busy with the work, yeah, you're busy in the vineyard. But when something like this happens, it's actually reaching into the diocese and affecting your flock directly. It's having a direct effect on your flock. And I think that is making them stand up. And I think Traditionis Custodes was a bit like that, because you saw, especially in America, that you got lots of bishops just not doing anything about it at all. You know, the vast majority just didn't implement it. And the same here in the UK, to the point where apparently Cardinal Arthur Roche is reading the Latin Mass magazine to look for the pictures to see where Mass is being said. And then he's ringing up the church and saying, why are you having the Latin Mass there? How bad is that?
That's rough.
So,
wow.
And this is the interesting thing that's going on really in Rome at the moment. You've got a pope who, you know, is trying to be instead of being a leader, instead of being a pope, he seems much more interested in being everyone's parish priest. He's like some mad old parish priest. You know, from the beginning, do you remember he's ringing up people and saying, oh, don't worry about the rules, go to Holy Communion, you know, despite the fact that you're divorced and remarried or whatever. And I mean, the thing that struck me about that was that he was undermining, you know, whoever was in charge in that particular diocese. And that's gone on throughout this papacy. With things like this, where's the consistency? We saw with the Amoris Laetitia that you ended up, the Pope is supposed to be the point of unity for us all as Catholics, isn't he? And what you saw, you know, is like a different policy in Poland than there is in, you know, Hungary or whatever. Well, how can you have that? I do think that we are in, you know, a time of persecution, really. And I think that it'll be very interesting to see what happens. But you've got Cardinal Sarah here has said that he stops short of calling the Pope a heretic, but he says that the document contains heresy. And I think this is a fatal, perhaps, mistake from Pope Francis and his cronies in Rome. I've got to the point personally where I can't see how anyone can defend what's going on. I mean, it's, you know, you can see that they've got a different agenda. And just as a Catholic, a lifelong Catholic, and someone who studied Catholic theology formally for a number of years, you find yourself at odds with much of the stuff coming out of the Vatican these days. It all seems like it's trying to sell you something that isn't Catholic, you know. It lacks that resonance that with scripture and tradition that we're used to as Catholics. And I think when you go back and read something from one of the other popes, you're immediately moved by, perhaps I'd like to think it was the Holy Spirit, that you're touched by that resonance that with the democracy of the dead, that you recognize that it's part of the church. So what's going to happen in the future? I'm hoping that what will happen is that more and more people will wake up to the problem that the massive problems that we're going to have to sort out, whatever happens after Pope Francis moves on. And I think that it's going to push the conclave to the right. I think it's going to mean that, please God, we have a really orthodox Pope next time round, because I don't know how anyone can look at what's going on in Rome and think that it is in any way beneficial for the gospel, for the faithful, for any of us. It's just been a complete disaster, isn't it?
We covered, as I said in the last segment, covered the book that was discovered from Cardinal Fernandez that was even more disgusting and gross than his kissing book was. I mean, that made that book look light fare. This book that we've just discovered.
Joe, he's got no. He shouldn't be in that role, should he? He shouldn't be in that position. He's only in that position because he's best buddies from Argentina with Pope Francis, and that's I don't understand how they can get into these positions, because if you think of Cardinal Muller, who held that position for, he was a double doctorate and a professor of a university. Fernandez did have a university position, but he was put in it by Pope Francis when he was Archbishop of Argentina, Buenos Aires. So, it's all jobs for the mates. It's all the jobs for the boys, we say in England, all the way through.
I see the division getting worse. I don't see it getting better. Do you think we can heal?
I think faithful Catholics are waking up to the fact that there's a problem with this papacy, and whether that's, some of them are frightened and they're just quiet and not saying very much about it, but others of them are beginning to speak out more increasingly. So I think it is a good thing, because they can't, look what's just happened with the Fiducia Supplicans. They can't implement this document. You've got cardinals coming out and saying that it should not be implemented, that it's basically heresy. This can't be a bad thing, because the more we push back now, the big problem we've got is that what's really going on behind the scenes, this is all a bit of a distraction, really, because what they're doing behind the scenes is they're putting the people in place who are going to just nudge this stuff through in the future. There's an article in Spanish publication today about a bishop who wants to downgrade, gay sex from being a sin, and he wants to normalize it in the church. And he's just been promoted to bishop. So he's a German guy, and he's just been promoted by the Vatican. So they're working all the time to push these things to the fore behind the scenes and put the people in place. That's why you got Grech and Hollerich and all these people running the show there. And I think it's really important for all of us, to expose that and to say, Pope Francis puts villainous people in high office. And this is a great example, Fernandez book. This guy's he's got that therapeutic ontology that we saw in Amoris Laetitia, and it's come through again in Fiducia Supplicans. We have to draw attention to it, and we have to show why it's not conducive to Catholic theology. It just doesn't work. You've got professors now, the guy who was the guy who came out from Steubenville the other
Regis
week.
Martin.
And that was fantastic, wasn't it? We need more of this, please. If the bishops won't do it, what did Archbishop Sheen say? It's down to us, isn't he? Who's going to save the church?
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.